and it was being distributed into the water supply. The chemical is typically used in small amounts to control the acidity of the water, but at higher levels it is very dangerous to consume. And this is an issue that could happen anywhere, anytime in the country. Joining me now to talk about this is Jonathan White. He is a senior security consultant at Trusted SEC. There he focuses on cybersecurity assessments for major corporations, and he is also a former Marine. Good afternoon, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Laverne. Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you. Well, it's very alarming to hear that someone could hack into our water system through a computer. Can you tell us how something like that's possible and how exactly they were able to do such a thing?
Well, basically, Laverne, it was subjected to remote access into the system. So, oftentimes, especially now, we know with the pandemic, there's more and more of a need for employees to be able to remote into systems, whether they're working from home or whatever. But basically, for utility systems, it's pretty much a standard to have that type of remote access. And that was how the system was infiltrated.
Is there anything that can prevent this type of attack?
Well, as we know, most of our accesses today, whether it's us for personal banking, we access our bank accounts remotely. If you're familiar with the fact that at least the bank that I currently use requires multi-factor authentication, which is one way to assist in preventing something like this from happening. So, for instance, I have a username and password, but my bank also sends a push to my personal cell phone where I have to enter in, you know, specific numbers in order for me to actually gain access. Other measures that you can do is to maybe turn the need of remote access off until it's actually needed. Whenever it's left up and available, basically anytime anyone could get in remotely. There's also methods that I'm sure can be used, for instance, where I can make my request to access remotely, but I won't be granted the access unless it is confirmed by someone who's physically connected to the system. So there's quite a few ways to help prevent something like this from happening, but for the most part, remote access in itself is just not the culprit.
So do you think they could have avoided that hack?
Well, honestly, we can speak to a lot of major corporations who we know have been hacked. One that stays on our mind is Target. And so, if you look at corporations like that, the question isn't really like, can it not be hacked, but can you make sure that you have all of the necessary protections that you feel should be in place in order to minimize the opportunity to be hacked?
Do people realize just how vulnerable we are when it comes to computers and sabotage?
Well, I would have to say that all of us have to do our proper due diligence to protect ourselves. We're not going backwards from the use of computers as we use them today. We're only going to rely on them a whole lot more. So, by performing steps such as changing your passwords on a periodic basis, using I guess long passwords or password phrases that are less easier to actually be figured out. Those are some of the measures that we should do as individuals to reduce our ability to be compromised, for our data to be compromised.
And Jonathan, we've been hearing that advice for a long time. As long as I can remember, they're always, telling you to change your password often, make it hard, make it long, that sort of thing. But when your information is with these big companies, like you said, you referenced Target, when your information is with these companies, you're kind of at their mercy. Is there anything you can do at all to protect yourself when big companies have your information?
Well, there are companies out there, that you can subscribe to provide you with sort of like insurance. Again, I don't know that there's a way to totally prevent things like this from happening. But if you're concerned about the protection, making sure that your credit report isn't affected because your, credit information or social security number was compromised, the most that you can probably do, in addition to trying to take the necessary steps, is to buy some sort of insurance protection.
Is there any that you recommend?
I typically don't go in the business of recommending, particular products or services, because then it would be that, well, basically Jonathan told me that this was okay, and yet this still happened. But there are several out there that you can just basically Google, as far as looking up insurance protection for cybersecurity crimes.
Do you use it yourself?
I do subscribe to some that are offered by different credit bureaus, where they not only just provide you with a notification that maybe your credit score has changed, but they also offer other additional protections, of course, for an added cost.
And as for cities and towns and states, what are you recommending they do so that something like this water hack doesn't happen again?
Well, the one thing is, again, with the water hack, it'll be a little bit hard to make the modifications to the system. One reason why is because utility systems have to remain up 24/7 for obvious reasons. So if you do any kind of upgrades, it'll be a challenge to try and get the upgrades to the system while, of course, the system is running. But I would suggest that systems like this consider either using multi-factor authentication or implementing multi-factor authentication, so that if there is remote access that's needed, it's not just a username and password, or to implement some sort of VPN, which is a virtual private network, which is sort of like a tunnel inside of the net connection, a protected tunnel inside of the internet connection, in order to give as much protection as possible. There can also be some sort of an alerting system that is implemented into their services, so that it'll have particular trigger levels set. So if, for instance, the lye level or the sodium hydroxide level rises, that it somehow notifies someone that this did occur.
Well, hopefully nothing like that happens again, but we appreciate your time, Jonathan White, cybersecurity expert. Thanks for joining us here on BNC Now.